Welcome back everyone. I've had a few requests for more nymphs, yellowfish nymphs and small flies for yellowfish predominantly, and I'm going to show you a little fly that I tied for trout many years ago, and I'm going to tie it on a jig hook, which is different from what I normally do it. I would normally tie it on something like the Grip 12004, which is a standard mayfly nymph hook. But I saw a video on YouTube of a similar fly, and it's very interesting how the guys tied the legs in. And I'll show you the first one. I'm going to show you mine, and then I'll show you the way they do it. It's a very interesting way, and I'll put a link to that video as well. And it's definitely something you can have a look at. The fly it's a little. I fished it as a little mayfly, and I'm tying this one on a Grip 14037 barbless hook, the jig hook, and I'm using a 3mm Grip slotted tungsten bead on it. Now you wrap the thread onto the hook and just secure that slotted bead, make sure it's in place, and then run it back towards the bend of the hook, just to before the bend. You can stop that, and you tie a very fine rubber leg tail in. I think this is Wapsi. There's no branding on this, so I'm not sure, but I think this is Wapsi. Just 2 strands like that, very fine tail. Tie that in the back and secure that right there. Now normally they're going to pop up, because as soon as you compress this rubber, it's going to pop up in all directions. You can cut that off. Now for the rib, I'm using just a normal copper wire. You can use vinyl rib, you can use a monofilament. There's many materials you can use, but I just normally use a copper wire. And then you tie a piece of copper wire in there. Just tie it on the far side of the hook, and it's easier to wrap it around. So I never tie the copper wire on top. I always tie it on the far side, so that when you make your first wrap, you don't wrap that over the tail. You wrap it underneath the body, and you'll miss the tail, because quite often when you wrap it over the tail, you tend to push the tail out of position. So just there, leave that copper wire there. Now when I used to tie that fly, I used the rabbit dubbing, but for this I'm going to use olive, like a dark olive camel dubbing, which is a Grip camel dubbing, and a very nice dubbing for nymphs. And there's no special technique on the dubbing. All you do is you just take that dubbing very thin. And by the way, I'm using a 8/0 Grip thread. Spread the dubbing out very thin and wrap it quite tight onto the hook. There. And you can build up a little bit of a tapered body with that, but you don't want it to be too bulky. Just about there, be fine. And then grab the copper wire, first wrap underneath the hook, and then around the abdomen. Just 2 or 3 wraps would be fine, and you tie that off. Get that out of the way, and then you tie a kind of flashy thorax. But before I do that, I would tie the rubber legs, again one on the far side, just get in there, and this is how I used to do it. Tie that in there, you just bend that end around, hold it against the abdomen, and tie it in on this side. Now this stuff is, because it's so fine, tends to get pushed out of position by the thread very easy, and then you have that sort of thing, and a loop. And I would always go and cut that loop. Just leave that there. You cut that, straighten that a bit later, and then make sure that your thread is behind the legs. So I'm just going to leave that there. Now I'm going to use a very fine super UV dubbing. I'm using a light olive here. Again, very little. And you wrap that, dab the thread again rather tight. There. And the first wrap behind the legs, very fine, and then in front of the legs, and you go behind again, just to make sure those legs stay in position, and then from behind to between the legs. You can make a few wraps there, and you push those other legs against the bead. You can bolt that up a bit between the legs. Then your last wrap goes in front of the legs. Right there. So I've got a little bit too much dubbing there. I'm going to do that and just remove that. And then you tie that fly off. Right there behind the bead, and make sure that those thread wraps are pulled in between the dubbing and the bead. And you can cut your thread and cut the legs. And that is what you have. A small little mayfly nymph with rubber legs. Now, the guys that the video that I saw is the fly is very similar to this. This is the first time I tied this on a jig hook though. I always tie it in normal nymph, like the 12003, 12004, one of those sort of hooks. The guys who tied this, and the video I watched, are the guys from Flyfishfood, and you should definitely give them a follow. They have some really interesting fly patterns, and all sorts of stuff. And they tied it very similar. So they call it the rope and dope nymph because of the abdomen material that they use. They use a kind of a fluffy woolly kind of abdomen material. Now I don't have anything like that, so I'm just going to tie it similar to what I've tied it now. You can go have a look. I'll put the link down below to their video. You can tie a similar, I'm going to tie a similar fly to what I tied just now, but just want to show you the way they put the legs in, and it kind of makes sense that you may find that there's a bit more movement in those legs. I'm just going to secure this bead and then run the thread back. And then I'm going to grab another one of these pieces of rubber leg. Now they are different. You'll also notice that they use a different type of rubber leg. They use something more like a spinnerbait skirt kind of material. I just find that the spinnerbait skirt or silly legs don't have the movement that you want on small flies like this. Then you tie those two tail ends in. If I can get the rubber legs to cooperate. There we go. Tie that in right there. They also use a different ribbing. I don't think, and they tie it as a stonefly. Quite interesting. Now, we don't have many stoneflies in South Africa. We do have some. I have seen some on rivers in northern Natal. I have seen stoneflies in the Vaal River, but it's not really enough to go and specifically imitate stoneflies. I tie this to imitate mayflies rather. So there's the tail. Then I'm just going to run that back and get that tail in position properly. There we go. I'm going to use copper wire again for the ribbing, but you can use monofilament. I think they use some vinyl, very fine vinyl kind of material. There we go. And the abdomen will be dark olive camel dubbing again. It's a very simple fly this. You can tie a dozen in a very short period of time. Just make sure to dab this quite tight, and you can remove some of the guard hairs if there are too many, because you want kind of a thin abdomen. Just and taper that abdomen a little bit. There we go. Copper wire for the ribbing. And cut that off. Now this is where the interesting part comes in. So you don't tie the rubber legs in first. You first dab the thorax. And what I noticed was that they do put the dubbing on quite tight, but there's a little bit of, you know, it's not as tight as what I used to do it. Just like that. And then you wrap that around from the bead all the way to the wing case, or to the abdomen. And when you run out of dubbing, you just keep wrapping. So you in the middle of the thorax, you make a bunch of wraps to tighten that dubbing. There. And this is where you tie the next set of legs in. So you grab one of those rubber leg strands, tie one in on the far side, and you tie that in over the dubbing. And it's one of those things, why don't I think of this? Tie that in there, and you tie the other one in on this side. Now the interesting thing, another interesting thing that he was doing is that he keep the loop there in the front until right at the end. So you tie those legs in, make sure they're in and secure properly, and then you use another bit of dubbing that you can wrap a little bit tighter on the thread, not much dubbing, very thin. You wrap that quite tight on the thread, and now you wrap between the legs to get them in position right there, and a few wraps. Lift that loop and make a few wraps there. I think I've got a little bit too much dubbing on this. It is the first time I'm doing this this way, so I'll definitely be experimenting with this a little bit more. One wrap there, got to remove some of that dubbing and get that thread in behind the bead. Tie that off right there. Go. Cut that off, and now you pull those legs up and you cut the loop. So that was my first attempt at their technique, and that is what you get then. I think with this technique it's easier to position the legs get the legs in the right position. As you can see, if I hold the fly like this, and this is the way the flies can swim, the legs are positioned at the bottom. I think it's because there's a bigger surface that you can play around with to move those legs up or down, where with the normal technique you only have the hook shank to tie them onto, and then they're going to sit in the middle, so they're going to sit a little bit higher. And with this sort of fly, a jig fly that you want it to swim this way around, you want those legs to be lower down but not on top of the hook. And I think this is one of the things that makes this technique quite interesting and appealing to me, at least. So I'll definitely be playing around with this technique, but I will post this their video. It's guys from flyfishfood. They've got a very nice channel. You can definitely go and have a look at that channel and give them a follow, and I'll definitely be playing around with this technique. So yeah, please let me know what you think of this technique and the fly, and please like the video, please subscribe to the channel, and I'll be back with more very soon. Thanks for watching.